Hello, everyone. I'm Donna Chacko, and once again, I'm here with my good friend Susan Riggs. Hello. We are here. Well, I'm here as part of Serenity and Health, and you know me from prior projects. But this time, Susan and I are collaborating to present to you a 10-part series called Engaging with a Messy World. And we are now on episode 3 with the challenging title called Systems Thinking. Susan is an integral coach with a lot of experience in systems type stuff. And I know she's going to untangle this in a way that I think will be interesting, but most importantly, will help us engage with our messy world in a more positive way. So, with that, I'll hand it over to you, Susan.
Thank you. Yeah, it's all about compassion and effectiveness. So systems thinking is a really big topic. But at its most basic, it's about understanding that any situation we're in, any problem we're trying to solve, is affected by many more factors than we might be seeing immediately. Every situation exists within a lot of other situations. And so the more we can understand these other situations around it, all the other factors, the better our chances are of being able to deal with the problem effectively and compassionately with less blame and reactivity. So just for a very basic example, you and I have both worked in community health. You're a physician, I'm an administrator, and we know that when a patient comes in with a medical question like, say, just a headache, that may be a physical thing that you can address with medication. But it could also be a number of other things. Could be stress, could be allergies, could be a nutrition issue. There are all kinds of things that might be going on. And, and even if we pinpoint those, there's a wider question of what conditions does this patient live in? It's the whole concept of social determinants of health. And we were fortunate enough to work in an organization that had the funding to address some bigger issues like poverty, nutrition, immigration status, all kinds of stresses that people might be experiencing that then feed into their medical condition. So it's really big to try to tease apart the causes for anything. Our organization even offered yoga and meditation for patients, and that goes a long way to addressing the bigger issues underlying.
Yes. You know, for those of you that don't know, this was a clinic, officially a federally qualified health center, and it's a partly federally funded nonprofit national organization with clinics in many underserved areas, cities, and rural. And the goal is to broadly treat patients, keeping all these things in mind, if possible, regardless of their ability to pay. And it was really striking for me because it was new to me to see how complicated people's lives were and the huge variety of things that could be contributing to poor health. Um, you know, if you don't have a place to stay, if you have one sure uh, cause of a headache, for example, might be carbon monoxide poisoning, and that's not going to be the first thing on your mind. And when you compare the the care was excellent, I felt, in that clinic because of this broad approach. And when I compare that to patients who only go to specialists, one specialist after another, and nobody with the broad view, the primary clinic was vastly superior, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, cool. And another example that you and I have talked about is, say we have a child in school who's not doing well and maybe isn't doing the homework. And a limited view of that might say, well, the child is lazy and needs the parents to get them to buckle down. But it's actually, we know better now. It's much more complicated usually, and there could be all kinds of factors going on, from just maybe some parenting lessons needed to much more serious things. The child could be experiencing homelessness or domestic violence or bullying in school. And if those things are going on, then surviving is the child's top priority, not homework.
Right.
So the school and the community need to look at the bigger picture and support the child's safety and health needs. And the more a community can invest in meeting those wider needs for kids who are struggling, the more likely it is that the kids will succeed and become productive adults. So addressing the system issues is a really good investment for the community.
Right. You read all these stories about teachers and how they are, well, seeing these needs in their students and having to reach beyond um, their defined job to try and solve social issues, which is, of course, why it becomes such a stressful, hard job for many teachers.
Yeah, and
Well,
it's this kind of investigation that led to school lunch programs in the first place. When teachers observed that the students in their classes weren't learning well, they were hungry.
yeah,
So the teachers started helping feed kids and lobbying for the school to feed kids. And if you just feed the kids, everything gets better.
interesting. Yeah, sleep will work like that too.
Sleep, definitely. Yeah, and often kids don't get enough sleep these days. So those are a couple of simple examples of how it helps to think bigger. And I want to point out that we can't always understand all of this. We can investigate the system issues and try to get a broader understanding, but we're never going to have a complete understanding because everything is deeply connected to everything else. And it's complicated, and our way of interpreting it is subject to our own narratives, like we talked about in episode 1. So we have to hold our understanding lightly, but we still need to investigate and do the best we can. Um,
Good
and
advice.
I'm sorry?
Good advice.
Yes, yes, and always aim at having a more compassionate understanding. So that whatever we think we're seeing, we need to look at it with as much kindness as possible and see what an effective and kind solution might be. So here's another area. One of the benefits of systems thinking is that it can help us let go of blame. And families are a good example of this. So a lot of people, probably most people, experience some conflict in their families. And sometimes there will be issues that erupt. There's an issue here, and then there's an issue here, and an issue here. And it's a different issue every time, and maybe among different people. But the whole family is over and over again involved in some kind of conflict. And a very wise therapist taught me that this is often not about the issues that it's supposedly or apparently about. It's about a bigger process of anxiety within the family. And this is called Bowen family systems theory. It's really powerful, and we don't have time to get into it here, but I know you've referred in your work to the same theory and to a really good book about it called Extraordinary Relationships by Roberta Gilbert.
Right.
So that reference will be in the show notes. It's worth reading for anybody who has family issues because it's such a humane and compassionate way of dealing with conflicts.
Right. Yeah, systems, whatever name you want to call it, but in family, generation to generation, siblings to siblings. I mean, many of us deal with this. I certainly do in my family, and sometimes it can be challenging because you don't fully understand it, but you know there's other factors at play, and you wish you could understand, and it takes time. It's not so easy, but at least understanding that those other factors exist is really freeing.
It is. It's very liberating compared to walking around thinking, well, I'm right and that person's wrong, and why don't they just shape up?
Right.
Because that's not going to happen.
Right. Or the other
Yeah,
way, which is I'm always wrong and I caused this whole problem and I'm bad. That's not so
yeah,
healthy either.
exactly. Yeah. Um, so that's families. And then there's one more issue that is complicated, but I want to touch on it just briefly because it addresses kind of the whole world, the whole messy world, and society-wide issues. So there's a really useful frame of reference for understanding whether groups are healthy or unhealthy. There's a sociologist named Riane Eisler who was born in Austria before World War II and emigrated and has spent her life studying conflict and violence and how groups work in good ways and not so good ways. And she talks about domination systems and partnership systems. So this can apply to groups at any scale. It can apply to a nuclear family or an extended family, a community, a neighborhood, a school, a business, a government agency, a religion, and entire nations. So at any scale, a group can operate either in a domination way or a partnership way. And the difference is that domination systems are top down, they're rigidly controlled. So there's a top authority that tells other people what to do. And power is maintained through fear and violence. It might be physical violence, or it might just be the threat of expulsion from the group. But there's fear, and dissent isn't allowed, and people are subjugated. Usually, women are considered less in these organizations. Women have fewer rights and are listened to less. A partnership organization, on the other hand, is relatively flat, not completely flat, because you have to have someone leading, but it's relatively flat and it's relatively open to ideas from anybody, to questions from anybody. And there's a lot of trust and respect, and people have rights that are protected. So those are the extremes. An organization could be somewhere on the spectrum between those. But I find it fascinating and really useful to look at that through that lens, because it helps us step away from the questions of, is it a religion? Is this religion a good one or a bad one? Is this economic ideology a good one or a bad one? They can all be domination. They can all be partnership. The question is not what type of organization it is, but how is it functioning in terms of domination systems or partnership systems? And I found that really, really eye-opening as a way of assessing what's healthy in our society.
Right.
Mhm.
Probably people
It's
can identify that, thinking of some families where there's a very, very strong figure, usually the father, the strong arm boss where no one is allowed to say. That might perhaps be a stereotype sometimes, but it's probably it does happen, and it's an example, I guess, of what you're talking about. And people below the father grow up not able to express opinions and just in fear of stepping over the line.
exactly. Yeah, that's a very apt example, because it does apply at the smallest scale in families and at the largest scale in nations. And what Riane Eisler's research has shown is that organizations with partnership structures will tend to thrive. Organizations with domination structures may continue for a long time, but there's not thriving within them. They don't do nearly as well as organizations that are more open and trusting. And she's got all the research to back that up. So humans are capable of both types of systems. We have it wired in us to do either one. More likely, we will default to a domination system if we grew up in a domination type family, which is one reason it's really important to help parents and children have healthier families. So seeing what type of system something is can help us decide whether to support it or stand against it and speak out. And this is systems thinking for the benefit of all of humanity. We don't have time to go into it at great depth, but I encourage everyone to read Riane Eisler's work, because it helps us look, again, with an eye for effectiveness and compassion, to what are some real solutions here and what are the real bigger problems.
Right.
So this is the super brief overview of systems thinking and how it can help us thrive and make more compassionate and forgiving decisions.
Right. Well, I think you did a good job of breaking that down. It is a huge topic. I mentioned to you before, you and I have talked about a quote, and it really struck me as a good way to end this conversation. It's attributed to Viktor Frankl. So I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up. The quote is this, and I've referred to it before. So some of you who've read my stuff might sound familiar. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. So the magic sauce is all in that space. And that's where we have a chance to stop and think before we speak, before we jump, before we act, before we push send, to think about if there are other factors, or in this context, other decisions, other viewpoints that that we perhaps better take into consideration before we act. I love the quote. It just seems so apropos. So, um, any other things you want to add, or did we get it all?
There's no way to get it all. People can spend a lifetime studying this, but I think it's a really cool concept to just be aware of, to know that this is there to help us think bigger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I've enjoyed hearing it myself. It's just a great reminder for us to be open to more than our narrow little thing space in front of us. So I thank you so much for that. And really, the resources, I encourage everybody to look at them and see what piques your interest and what you'd like to study more. So we'll be back for more soon for our 4th episode. And we thank you so much for listening to us. My website is serenityandhealth.com. And Susan's is integral, Riggs integral. Please say it.
Yeah, riggsintegralcoaching.org.
Thank you. I didn't want to mess that up. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.